Hello everyone and welcome back to another Wizard101 video. Today I have another case of sudden sickness, except that sickness is a lot worse because my throat is actually sore. But I'm ignoring it, as always, to record another amazing video. Today I'm going based off a recommendation I got on my Discord server with PyroSquid, which was, can you redo your video where you rated all the worlds? Now I don't know if you guys remember this, you probably don't considering it has like 300 views and it was uploaded a very long time ago. Basically, I made a ranking the worlds video where I took each world and broke it down into 4 different categories. Those categories being aesthetic, storyline, characters, and music. I gave each of those categories a ranking out of 10, and then I gave the world an overall ranking out of 40. So, I gave a good way to see how I viewed each world. Today, I'm going to redo that, except I'm not going to actually rank them in order of best to worst. I'm just going to go in order of the worlds, and then you can kind of see my opinions on each world based on that. And I would like to say, some worlds are skewed. Some of them I have opinions on certain things on that make them a little bit more than other worlds. Like, for example, I really like the characters in one world, and I hate the aesthetic in another world. And it's not exactly what you would think in regards to each of that world's rankings. It's just how I view each world. So let's get into it and start with the ranking. Starting with Wizard City. Wizard City, I gave a total of 25.5 out of 40. For the 4 categories, I went with 9 out of 10 for aesthetic, 5 out of 10 for storyline, 3 out of 10 for characters, and 8.5 out of 10 for music. And now let me go over each of those. For aesthetic, 9 out of 10, I felt it was fairly obvious. Recently, there was a massive update which changed the graphics of the worlds, specifically Wizard City, to look very good. The only reason why I don't give Wizard City a full 10 out of 10 is specifically just because I actually lag in Firecat Alley. And I don't know if you know this, but I have a really good computer. I should not be lagging in Firecat Alley. They definitely did something wrong there. I don't know exactly what, but they messed it up a little bit. They fixed that, and it's a 10 out of 10 for me because the new graphic update is obviously amazing. In regard to storyline, I gave it a 5 out of 10. The reason why I gave it a 5 out of 10 is because I feel like the new storyline isn't nearly as impactful as the old one was. The Cyclops Lane especially feels a lot worse than it used to. So does Firecat Alley. And I still don't understand why Triton Avenue, why they switched Susie and Arter's roles. I've been complaining about that since it happened, and I'll probably complain about it until the end of time. That's the main reason why the storyline is so low, just because I'm a little bit miffed compared to what it used to be. For characters, I went 3 out of 10 because if they destroyed the storyline, oh, let me tell you how they destroyed the characters. Private Quinn, my boy, my friend to the Fire Elves kind of man, has been reduced to a weenie boy who refused to venture further in Firecat Alley. In Cyclops Lane, Nolan Stormgate has been reduced to just a complete douche, removing how he was actually kind of competent and he figured out how to actually get through to General Achilles and all that, despite the fact that he was a douche, right? So he had some good character traits. We have Private Stilson right in front of Unicorn Way. He used to say, "Halt, none shall pass," and now he doesn't do that anymore. Right? Stuff like Sarah Nightchant saying greetings. All of these things I miss about these characters. They were like defining character traits, and what made the characters themselves have been like brutally removed from each character, and it's just really disappointing. I think I like each of the old characters so much better than the Wizard City characters. Finally, we have music, which is an 8.5 out of 10. The only reason why this isn't higher is specifically because I think Ravenwood's music in the old version is better than the music in the new version. I think the new music for Ravenwood is just significantly more boring and less whimsical like it should be in Ravenwood. But overall, I give an 8.5 out of 10, and that is my Wizard City ranking. Next is Crocotopia, which I gave a total of 26 out of 40. For the categories, I gave aesthetics a 5 out of 10, storyline a 4 out of 10, characters a 7 out of 10, and finally music a 10 out of 10. Now, aesthetic for me is pretty obvious. The aesthetic of Crocotopia is really gross, and it's one of the worlds that definitely needs a graphic update the most. I mean, just look at it. It's severely outdated. You can see it was made back in like 2008. It needs an update. The storyline was a little bit boring and also incredibly short, and the pacing was strange. The Pyramid of the Sun is super short, whereas the Crocosphinx is super long. Going back to the Tomb of Storms, it's short again. And it's just really strangely paced, and I've never really liked the Crocotopia storyline because it feels like we didn't really accomplish much. We did defeat Crocopatra, which I'll give it that, which is probably where most of the points come from. But the rest of it, it doesn't feel like we accomplished much. We don't get to interact with Misteria all that much. It's just a bit lame. Characters at a 7 out of 10. This is because we have some really memorable characters. Like we have Sergeant Major Talbot, we have Hedgehog Dim, we have Zane the Librarian, we have Professor Winthrop, and then we have Assistant Danforth, who is apparently a villain. Each of these are characters that I remember that are near and dear to my heart, and I love them. And finally, we have the music, which for me gets a perfect score. I absolutely love the Crocotopia music, and to this day, it is one of my favorite soundtracks, and there's almost no soundtracks that perfectly encapsulate a world nearly as much as Crocotopia's. But that's it for Crocotopia. Let's move on to the next world. The next world on our list is Wisteria. I give Wisteria a total of 23.5 out of 40, so it is our lowest ranking so far. I give its aesthetic a 7 out of 10, its storyline a 2.5 out of 10, its characters a 6 out of 10, and its music an 8 out of 10. So I feel like all of this is fairly obvious. I love the aesthetic of this world. I think it's really good, obviously, if a little bit outdated in some places. The characters are all pretty good. There's some memorable ones, like Belladonna Crisp and whatever. They are kind of assholes, but there are some memorable characters. Music is really, really good as well. I do love the music in this world, but the storyline is very lackluster. It's very short. It isn't honestly all that engaging besides the Spiral Cup parts. And overall, it's just a bit of disappointment. I really wish that they'd fleshed it out more. Otherwise, Wisteria would be a really good world in my opinion. I just think it's a bit too short. Next up, we have Marley Bone, which has our highest ranking so far at 37.5 out of 40. The categories here I gave were a 9 out of 10 for aesthetic, 9 out of 10 for storyline, 9.5 out of 10 for characters, and 10 out of 10 for music. Anyone who's seen my favorite worlds videos should have saw this coming. I absolutely love Marley Bone. It's one of my favorite worlds. The aesthetic definitely deserves the 9 out of 10 for me. I love the Victorian England aesthetic. It's always been one of my favorites. And I don't think I'll ever be able to change this. And a graphics update would only do this world justice. Like, it would only make this world better for me, and I already love it. The storyline's a 9 out of 10 because it's a really cool storyline, right? Where Meowiarty breaks out of prison, you have to hunt him down, you have to clean the streets, stuff like that. And then eventually you find out Misteria is working with Meowiarty, and they kind of team up, and eventually, you know, you see Misteria again at the final dungeon, which for me is enough to be pretty cool, because it is cool whenever we see Misteria in one of these earlier worlds. Characters, 9.5 out of 10. This has to do with, like, Sherlock Bones is an amazing character. We have Watson, who's an amazing character. All these characters are just very memorable. Miss Conrail, Baxter. They're near and dear to my heart, and I'll never forget them. Finally, music is a solid 10 out of 10. I love the music in this world, just as much as I love the music in Crocotopia. As I've said, it's one of the other ones that I think perfectly fits the world, just in every single way. So overall, that's my ranking for this world. Next on our list, we have Grizzleheim, which I gave a 28 out of 40. I think Grizzleheim is a pretty good world. It just has a little bit of a few downfalls with it. For the 4 categories, I give it a 9 out of 10 for aesthetic. I give it a 5 out of 10 for storyline, 5 out of 10 for characters, and finally a 9 out of 10 for music. I love the aesthetic of this world, and as I've always said whenever someone mentions Grizzleheim, I think it is an amazing aesthetic world. Like, it looks really, really good, and it does feel really good, right? It's an amazing look, and it gives me heavy Skyrim vibes, which I love Skyrim, right? I've mentioned that plenty of times. But the characters, I think the characters are a bit lacking. The only real memorable one, in my opinion, is like Bjorn Ironclaws and then the King. And the King, I don't even really remember his name, which kind of just shows how memorable I think his character is. Overall, it's just, the characters aren't too interesting to me in this world. The storyline also is a bit lacking. Like, some of these I remember the story, but like, I only really remember the story of Ravenscar just because Ravenscar's burned into my mind as one of the worst areas in this game, taking me an hour to do each time. But the story, I don't really remember for a lot of these. All I remember is we're trying to stop the Coven, and that's just like the overarching line. I don't even remember why we go to each of these streets. So overall, storyline's a bit lacking, but the music is obviously really, really good. I love the music. Let's be honest. The music in Grizzleheim is amazing. I will never think otherwise. Next, we have Wushu, which is sitting at a solid 30 out of 40. I gave aesthetics 7 out of 10, storyline 7 out of 10, characters 6 out of 10, and finally music 10 out of 10. Now, as I've said, music, I love music. I think it fits this world's aesthetic perfectly. It's really, really good. Aesthetic, I gave a 7 out of 10 because, as I've mentioned before, I love the aesthetic of this world. I think it's an amazing looking world, and the only reason why it's a 7 out of 10 is because it definitely needs a graphics update. It looks a little bit outdated, and by a little bit outdated, I mean a lot bit outdated. If they could re-update this and use the Pirate 101 graphics for Wushu, this world would solidly be in first place as my favorite. Storyline, 7 out of 10. I think that this is mainly because I don't think the storyline is all that good. It's good, but it's not all that good. It doesn't really relate to the Misteria overarching plotline. We do get some pretty cool things like saving the Emperor of Wushu, going to the Muda statue, passing the 3 tests, all that. Characters, 6 out of 10. I don't think there's a lot of memorable characters. I think, obviously there's the Emperor, there's Jade Champion in front of the palace. A lot of the characters aren't really memorable in my opinion. I wish they were a bit, but the characters are kind of lackluster. But that's really it for Wushu. I think that all of those categories are pretty fair in regards to ranking, especially when I consider this world to be one of my favorites. I think it definitely, since it's a bit less of a ranking on this video, I think it's fair. Next, we have Dragonspire, which sits at a 26.5 out of 40. For aesthetic, I give it a 3 out of 10. For storyline, I gave it a 9.5 out of 10. Characters, I gave it a 6 out of 10. And music, I gave it an 8 out of 10. I think that Dragonspire is really, really good. As I've said, the music is really, really solid at an 8 out of 10. I think the only reason why it's not a 10 out of 10 is because I feel like some of the areas, the music feels a bit out of place, I've noticed. The music doesn't perfectly fit. All the tracks are really epic and tense, and there's some areas of this world that aren't supposed to be epic and intense, if you know what I mean. That's my only gripe with the music. I love all the soundtracks, don't get me wrong. Storyline is obviously amazing. This is finally the world where we eventually beat Wisteria, and we have to go through the actual steps of becoming a student of Dragonspire Academy and flying a drake to actually go battle Wisteria. I love the storyline in this world. It's amazing. But the downfalls of this world, the characters, there aren't a ton of memorable characters. Obviously, there's Xanax, as I like to call him, who betrays you. There's Milo's Bookworm in the Athenium. Cyrus Drake, I guess, technically counts as one of these characters, but there isn't a ton of NPCs that really just spring to mind in this. I can't remember the name of most of the NPCs that give you the main quests for each of the areas in the game. I think it's just kind of a little bit lackluster, and I wish there was a few more really cool characters. In regards to the aesthetic, and this has to be my least favorite, is just look at Dragonspire. It heavily needs an update in graphics. I honestly think it needs it the most out of all of the 5 main worlds, and the reason for that is just because of the rocky, barren aesthetic. It needs the update just that much more than any of the other worlds. The world has some really, really ugly looking places, and I can't wait for it to actually be updated and those to be fixed. Alright, so after editing this video and going through it, I've decided that I'm actually going to split this up into 2 parts. The footage was very long. It's going to end up being like a 35-minute video, so I would much rather split this up into part 1, part 2, and end here at Dragonspire with about equal worlds to what's going to be in part 2. So that's what I'm going to do. If you're excited, make sure to stay tuned for tomorrow for the next part in this video. If you enjoyed this first part, let me know in the comments. Leave your rankings for each world below using my system. Do you like them? Do you disagree with my opinions on some of them? Let me know. I'm interested in your opinion. But that's it for today. Make sure to drop a like at the sub button. Go support me financially on Patreon if you wish, and join my Discord server. We're close to 300 members. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Adios.